I speak to people in quite high-class circles within London that knew Meghan pre-getting married to Harry. They alleged that her intention was to come over to Britain and find a famous boyfriend, whether it be a footballer or someone very successful. She hit the jackpot. She hit the complete jackpot. But what she doesn't like is the downside to being a royal, the duties and the tradition. And for me, it's unforgivable what she's done to the royal family. When she didn't get her own way, she sought to destroy the family, and she nearly did.
This is your daily dose of all things royal. Welcome back, my gorgeous, good-looking friends. So much has been going on this week, and I hate the fact that my news feed is constantly being filled with Prince Harry and his court garbage. Like, I could really care less about Harry being emotional and nearly brought to tears. At this point, I have no sympathy or empathy for these two. Like, people don't understand the depth of the damage that these two have caused here in the United States. I think a lot of the news that we're seeing of Harry in this court case, as well as Brooklyn Beckham and Nicole Peltz and that drama with the Beckhams, is all designed for distraction. And I think the news of these two well-known British celebrities is an attempt to distract from Davos and the utter embarrassment of the Starmer government. Just as a temperature check, if you're in the UK, let me know in the comments section below if these celebrities are making the front pages of your newspapers. Now, by now, I'm certain that there are many channels that have covered the Brooklyn Beckham drama as well as Prince Harry's court case, so we're not going to do that here on this video, aside from saying that I don't really care about Harry whining and moaning in court. What's more important to me here is reminding people of the harm that Harry and Meghan caused, because not many people were paying attention or understood what these globalists had been doing. The same globalists that are now kissing Donald Trump's ass in Davos this week. But before we get into tearing apart the World Economic Forum's circus in Davos, if you could do the kid a favor and hit that like button, as well as double check to see if you're still subscribed. We know how YouTube gets a little crazy at times with this channel. And I think it's important to acknowledge that it's because of your support in liking, subscribing, and sharing is the reason why we've gained this momentum now, with visibility as well as certain eyes from DC looking at the information. So, just know that you are playing a very important part here. So thank you for that. And now, without further ado, let's get into it.
And perhaps how you two and the places where you come from can do much better by following what we're doing, because certain places in Europe are not even recognizable, frankly, anymore. They're not recognizable. And we can argue about it, but there's no argument. Friends come back from different places. I don't want to insult anybody and say I don't recognize it. And that's not in a positive way. That's in a very negative way. And I love Europe, and I want to see Europe go good, but it's not heading in the right direction. In recent decades, it became conventional wisdom in Washington and European capitals that the only way to grow a modern Western economy was through ever-increasing government spending, unchecked mass migration, and endless foreign imports. The consensus was that so-called dirty jobs and heavy industry should be sent elsewhere, that affordable energy should be replaced by the Green New Scam, and that countries could be propped up by importing new and entirely different populations from faraway lands.
Clearly, President Trump is not messing around, and it is obvious that this is pointed towards the European leaders, and without having to say it, the UK itself. As many of you know, I love my country and the principles that our founding fathers stood for. As a result of these stupid, parasitic globalists, our leaders from both sides of the aisle, more so with the Democrats, have certainly lost their way by putting greed and power ahead of serving this country. And we saw this exacerbate during the Biden regime. The whole world took advantage of Biden's auto pen.
This was the path that Sleepy Joe Biden administration and many other Western governments very foolishly followed, turning their backs on everything that makes nations rich and powerful and strong. And there's so much potential in so many nations. The result was record budget and trade deficits and a growing sovereign deficit driven by the largest wave of mass migration in human history. We've never seen anything like it. Quite frankly, many parts of our world are being destroyed before our very eyes, and the leaders don't even understand what's happening. And the ones that do understand aren't doing anything about it. Virtually all of the so-called experts predicted my plans to end this failed model would trigger a global recession and runaway inflation. But we have proven them wrong. It's actually just the opposite. In 1 year, our agenda has produced a transformation like America has not seen in over 100 years. Instead of closing down energy plants, we're opening them up. Instead of building ineffective, money-losing windmills, we're taking them down and not approving any. Instead of empowering bureaucrats, we're firing them, and they're going out and getting jobs in the private sector for 2 and 3 times what they were making in government. So they started off hating me when we fired them, and now they love me. Instead of raising taxes on domestic producers, we're lowering them and raising tariffs on foreign nations to pay for the damage that they've caused.
I'm not sure who Trump is looking at, but if I had to guess, it had something to do with the usual suspects like the United Nations, the World Trade Organization, the IMF, NATO. They were all sitting there in that audience, like this woman that Meghan was with in Nigeria from the WTO. This globalist hypocrisy, especially with the American globalists like Larry Fink of BlackRock seen here, and Brian Moynihan from Bank of America, who also was put in charge of King Charles's Sustainable Markets Initiative focused on the so-called climate, has me very irritated. And the reason why is because these were the same folks who pushed this DEI and climate nonsense that has caused so much suffering and division across the West. Yesterday, Trump delivered his speech in front of all of these hypocrites, questioning the loyalty of other nations.
But now what I'm asking for is a piece of ice, cold and poorly located, that can play a vital role in world peace and world protection. It's a very small ask compared to what we have given them for many, many decades. But the problem with NATO is that we'll be there for them 100%. But I'm not sure that they'd be there for us. If we gave them the call, gentlemen, we are being attacked. We're under attack by such and such a nation. I know them all very well. I'm not sure that they'd be there. I know we'd be there for them. I don't know that they'd be there for us. So with all of the money we expend, with all of the blood, sweat, and tears, I don't know that they'd be there for us.
Trump is absolutely right here. The U.S. has done a lot throughout history for other nations, and we don't ask for much in return. All of these countries walked all over the United States when Biden was in office. And when it came time to help Americans, especially when we had the Maui fires, we had the LA fires, we had the illegals invading our country, and the United Nations was funding it, nobody helped Americans. So Canada and France showing up at Davos with their veiled threats to cozy up with China because we are done subsidizing them, that was certainly not lost on Donald Trump.
We're building a golden dome that's going to, just by its very nature, going to be defending Canada. Canada gets a lot of freebies from us, by the way. They should be grateful also, but they're not. I watched your prime minister yesterday. He wasn't so grateful. But they should be grateful to us. Canada lives because of the United States. Remember that, Mark, the next time you make your statements.
And then you have this clown, Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, showing up at Davos to make an ass out of himself. Seen here with Alex Soros, I think we all know why Gavin Newsom went to Davos. I wonder how much dark money now is going to be coming into the United States to support a potential 2028 run. The world is in the state that it is in is because of people like this. They are the ones who have caused this managed decline across the West. And they all desperately want to keep this theft of American taxpayer going. You also had Chris Coons, Prince Harry's buddy with African Parks. He was also there giving a talk about the future of foreign aid. The canceling of USAID. He also was a bit disparaging about the United States.
There's been pushback, and it's part of a larger theme that you hear from the administration: burden sharing. We spent most of the money that kept Europe safe and secure through NATO. Europe has stepped up dramatically and is taking responsibility for funding. This year, the United States will still be the world's largest humanitarian and development assistance donor. But the visible destruction of AID, Elon Musk saying that it is compassion that is the great weakness of the West, the speed and the strength and the cruelty and the senselessness with which whole organizations and partnerships were just burned, storehouses of medicines and food just abandoned, has created the mistaken impression that the United States has walked away. Next week, we will finish passing in Congress, and the president will sign $50 billion in the funding area where in the last Congress I wrote that bill that was AID and state. It's only a few billion different. So PEPFAR is still funded. We are still engaged in humanitarian relief. We are still engaged in development assistance. It has taken a huge divot. Our reputation as a trustworthy partner has taken an enormous loss. But I think as we look forward towards rebuilding, a few simple facts: 80% of Americans believe that we should be doing humanitarian relief in response to hunger, drought, disasters, pandemics. 60% of Americans think we should be spending on democracy, on rule of law, on sustainability. It is supported by a majority of Americans. With frankly, lies. A campaign to take down AID quickly succeeded, but it misrepresented what we were doing. It played on the fact that most Americans thought there was some waste and it wasn't well aligned with their values. There is a determined bipartisan group of us in Congress and in our NGO community and in our private sector that now are looking at how do you rebuild it and how do you make it sustainable, fit for purpose for the long term.
And this is the messed up thing, is when you have facts that have been presented to the American public and they're still saying that they're lies, this is where the Democrats have lost the plot. This goes to show you how disconnected these Democrats are to Americans. Like, they really do think that we're stupid and that we didn't see the fraud ourselves, especially with the illegal invasion and our taxpayer dollars going towards funding things, but Americans were suffering. And at the same time, knowing that money was being thrown over to foreign countries and it just disappearing and no improvements have been happening. What I can't understand is the amount of money that the United States has pumped in over the past 5 decades since USAID had been set up under John F. Kennedy, is that how is it a lot of these nations are no further than where they were 5 decades ago? Africa sitting there freaking out over the lack of aid that's now going to be coming from the United States as a result of DOGE exposing money being wasted. How are they saying that? What are they going to do now that America can't be depended on? And that's not the case. Like, we're not saying that we're not going to give aid. We're just saying we're not going to give aid that's going to either fund terrorism or be able to line other people's pockets and not actually going to helping people who are in need. The whole point of USAID is for international development, to help advance societies. It's not about throwing money at these countries so they can take it and do whatever they want with it and still continue to keep depending on us. That's not the point of this particular money. And what Trump is trying to do here is reset that expectation. Too effing bad that these globalists don't like it, because now they have to figure out another way to grift off the backs of, hardworking people. Contrary to what Chris Coons says, America does care. We care about our own people. We want to help our own people. And before we can help others, we need to help ourselves. We need to fix the damage that these people at the World Economic Forum have caused. What's so hard to understand about that? And one of those people that we should all be talking about that has caused a lot of this division and friction in the world right now is the CEO of Salesforce, Mark Benioff. Not only is Mark a member of the World Economic Forum, but he's also a main agenda contributor and on the board of trustees for this corrupt organization. This multi-billionaire had tremendous amount of influence when it came to pushing this whole climate change bullshit and also supporting this diversity, equity, and inclusion nonsense that caused so much division for almost like 10 years. Remember, a lot of this fake outrage and crying racism began in 2016 when Donald Trump won the election. You just got to look at Meghan and Harry's relationship to tell the story of what these globalists were doing. From the very beginning, Meghan and Harry cried racism, literally 7 days after it was announced that they were dating. And is it a coincidence that in 2018, Mark buys Time magazine and then 2 years later gives Most Influential Award to Harry and Meghan? And then on top of it, Harry gets a job with the organization that Salesforce is a big funder of called BetterUp, where Harry's using this as legitimate work, even though he does absolutely nothing for this organization to hold on to his visa? Was Harry given this position as a favor to Pa to make things look legit while Harry was over here undermining our First Amendment and meddling with the 2020 election? You know, it'd be interesting to find out who invited Mark Benioff to this state dinner with the King and Donald Trump. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that Donald Trump and Marco Rubio understand the role that these social media platforms and tech giants played in the rigging of the 2020 election. There's a reason for why Donald Trump said this yesterday in his speech at Davos and not in the United States.
It's a war that should have never started, and it wouldn't have started if the 2020 U.S. presidential election weren't rigged. It was a rigged election. Everybody now knows that. They found out. People will soon be prosecuted for what they did. It's probably breaking news, but it should be. It was a rigged election. Can't have rigged elections.
Time magazine was all on board with Harry and Meghan when it came down to talking about mis and disinformation and preserving democracy and having free and fair elections. But really, Time magazine fully understood exactly how these tech companies were suppressing information. Time magazine had the gall to write about this shadow campaign or infrastructure that they had to save the 2020 election. They openly talked about how they were pressuring platforms to remove content or accounts that spread what they deemed disinformation, aka censored. And I think now, looking back at all of this, I think Murky Meg was set up. I think Mark Benioff retweeted Murky Meg's tweet for a reason, to give visibility into these accounts that Harry and Meghan wanted pulled down. And the Sussex Squad were all in coordination with and the Sussex Squad was all in coordination with these disinformation campaigns that were being pushed out onto innocent, unsuspecting people to get us all in line and to drive out any kind of dissent. Dissent that didn't support the agenda that the left was pushing, which was this progressive, liberal, woke shit. As I've said in the past, the Sussex Squad was very much a part of this military-grade censorship operation that was going on, unbeknownst to all of us. This is a sample of what the Sussex Squad were saying when Murky Meg got suspended. Now, before I go ahead and play this clip, I want you to know that Murky Meg never did the things that this woman is accusing Murky Meg of doing.
You know, where she's instigating people, telling them to go attack Meghan and stab her stomach and all kinds of, these are the things that Twitter is now endorsing by verifying her. And then you see the CEO of Salesforce, and if you don't know what Salesforce is, go look up Salesforce, okay? The CEO of Salesforce and the owner of Time magazine retweeting her. And I know last week people wanted to talk about it, but I didn't want to talk about it because I knew that was going to be Murky Meg's down.
This was Murky Meg's tweet, and I think what she did, she had Prince Harry's mouth move singing along to I Want to Break Free by Queen. I mean, it was funny. It wasn't racist. It wasn't hateful. And everybody was up in arms over it because Mark Benioff had retweeted it.
That was going to be her downfall, because next thing you know, his board of directors are getting involved in this because they're like, oh my God, he is amplifying hate, right? So he now has to go get to delete that tweet. And to delete that tweet, that means that Time and Salesforce, which is one of the top tech people in the world, had to go through her timeline and see all the hatefulness that she has on there. And so, believe you me, Twitter is not going to be the only place that Murky Meg is going to be gone from soon, because all these people are connected. They are all in the Silicon Valley. So they probably looked at her timeline and they're like, holy shit, this is what we've been fighting. Mind you, Time Magazine is in partnership with different companies to fight online trolling and troll farms and all this stuff. So like, this is what they've been fighting, and their CEO, their owner, I knew it. I'm telling you, she got verified. And I remember there were conversations that people were having. I said, I give it 2 weeks. I have the screenshot of this, and I'll send it to some people. I said, I give it 2 weeks, she will be gone.
Looking back, knowing what we know now, this was heavily coordinated, especially with this squatty saying that, oh, the board of directors saying we can't have this hate. Does anyone really believe now that the CEO of Salesforce was bullied by the board of directors to unretweet his tweet of Murky Meg's parody? And this squatty somehow knew that the board of directors were somehow disapproving of it? Give me a break. Looking back on this and understanding Mark Benioff's business, which is in the business of data and analytics, probably was done to see the reach that Murky Meg was getting, because I think she was the first one to get a blue check mark. This was before you could pay for it. And another giveaway here is that this squatty is openly saying that she knew that Murky Meg was going to get taken down. Now, I'm going to say that there's a high possibility that Mark Benioff had a good idea as to what Harry and Meghan were called to do when they came over here in 2020 to help the Biden election campaign. And I would think to some degree, he knew about this military-grade censorship operation that was going on, especially since his own magazine had wrote this extensive article on this shadow structure that was in place to guard this fair and free election that we had, which we all know now was rigged. So now fast forward to this week's World Economic Forum in a conversation between David Sachs from the Trump administration and Mark Benioff about online harm and Section 230.
When the internet kind of came along, and even before the internet, we there's one regulation that everyone in Silicon Valley really loves, which is Section 230. Mm-hmm. And that basically says, you know, these tech companies, initially the social media companies cannot be held responsible, and perhaps maybe even the AI companies cannot be held responsible for bad behavior of the AI. When you look at Section 230 and kind of accountability, self-regulation, do you think that do you think the Section 230 should be reformed, reshaped, reconstructed, or do you think it stands as it is, kind of preventing, and kind of holding full indemnification for the tech vendor?
Well, Mark, I might be the last person on either side of the political aisle who thinks that Section 230 was a visionary piece of legislation that helped pave the way for the modern internet. I know there's opposition to it on both sides. The reason I say that is because what 230 did is it basically defined who's a publisher and who's a distributor. And under the existing law, publishers are held to one standard, distributors are held to another. In other words, if you're, say, a magazine on the distribution stand and you libel someone, or an article in your publication libels someone, well, you can be sued and you're on the hook for that, and you're going to end up paying damages. Now, the newsstand on which your magazine is sold, that is a distributor, and it is not subject to publisher liability. And so what Section 230 did is take those sort of real-world examples and apply them to online context. And specifically, what it said is that user-generated content will be treated on these platforms, that the platforms will be distributors, not publishers. Now, look, if those platforms are actually publishing the content themselves, and I think this probably would apply to AI companies who are creating content, we're going to hold them to publisher liability. But if all they're doing is acting as a distributor, then we're going to impose distributor liability. I think that distinction made a lot of sense. Maybe it's not perfect in some cases, but without that, I don't think you would have had comment boards on the internet. I think, user review sites like Yelp might have been sued out of existence. Think about it. Every time someone posts a review on Yelp that the store owner says, well, that's defamatory, I'm opposed to that, they can now sue Yelp. I think that these user-generated platforms may not have survived. And so I think it was very, very important in terms of allowing user-generated content to flourish all over the internet, including then on social media platforms. Ultimately, it's the user that benefits from the ability to express themselves. And I'm just not sure that if all of those UGC platforms were treated like publishers, that we'd be able to express ourselves in the way that we've been able to. And yes, you can point to some downsides of that, but on the whole, I think it's been very positive. And what I worry about is if 230 gets reformed and gets to be more restrictive, it's going to lead to much greater censorship. Already corporations have been taking down a lot of content that, I think it's now much better under President Trump, but under the last administration, you saw an epidemic of shadow banning, deplatforming, when someone expressed an opinion that went against the sort of conventional wisdom or the powers that be. Saw a lot of censorship during COVID. Things that are now recognized as being true cannot be said without the user, like Dr. Jay Bhattacharya was kicked off X for the Great Barrington Declaration. So you look back on those things and say, gee, that was a really dangerous period where people were censored too much. We've now moved out of it, but what I worry about is you take away Section 230 protection, and now because of simple corporate risk aversion, these sites are really going to clamp down, and people aren't going to be able to express themselves in the same way.
And how about then making the connection back to what we're talking about with AI or an AI that is behaving badly?
Well, I'm not sure that Section 230 does apply to AI companies because, look, this is getting into novel areas of law. Who knows how it's going to, be determined? Probably I'd want to consult some lawyers about this, but if you're getting me to react on the fly to this, 230 has always been applied to user-generated content on platforms. In the case of AI, it's the AI company that's publishing the content. So I think the liability might be a little different, but we'll see how it plays out.
I get the feeling that Mark Benioff is not a fan of free speech and is not too pleased with this response that David Sachs had given, because he knows full well what was going on at that time, especially being involved with the people who were doing it, Harry. So now, given the fact that Mark Benioff is a big-time supporter of the World Economic Forum and this globalist shit, that back in 2020, he most likely was not a Donald Trump fan. When you look at his political party donations going to the Democrats, likely he was a Biden supporter. So this photo that we have here is something real special. But I'd love to know what you guys think. Do you think Donald Trump knows? Do you think Mark Benioff has got his tail between his legs? I don't trust these people for a second, because literally overnight, all of a sudden now the climate problem is no longer being talked about, as well as all of that diversity, equity, and inclusion, socialist bullshit. Now it's about AI and how they can enslave us and control our money that way. It's going to be really interesting to see how all of this starts to pan out. I really do hope that they do start arresting people, because all of the people that were surrounding Trump for the most part at Davos are the same ones who were plotting against him back in 2020 to steal the election. And that includes Prince Harry and Meghan. More to come on that in tomorrow's video. But what do you guys think? Definitely leave your thoughts below. As always, I will be back with more content. But until then, please be safe, and I'll talk to you later. Bye!
Such a fraud.